The impact of the pandemic on the mental health of Canadians is still being measured, but we know social isolation, uncertainty about the future is having an impact, and it's especially acute in Indigenous communities. A new survey this week from Stats Canada found 60% of Indigenous people say their mental health has worsened since the onset of physical distancing measures. Overall, 38% reported fair or poor mental health. That's 22% higher than in the most recent Aboriginal Peoples survey. Well before COVID-19, too many young Indigenous people were crying out for help. As Jeff Semple tells us, there's at least one new resource now offering help that's a phone call away.
Ashley Cummings' childhood photos carry mixed emotions.
This one's me and my dad. He read to me a lot every night when I was little.
The good times, growing up in Nunavut, snowmobiling with her parents, and the tough times as a teenager, losing several cousins and friends to suicide.
Suicide has been a very prominent part of my life since I was a young child.
As an Inuk, she knows all too well how the suicide rate among Inuit is one of the highest in the world, almost 10 times the Canadian average. And when she was 16, she almost became one of those statistics.
Because it was just such a very visceral pain that I was being, or I guess I was almost subjecting myself through because I didn't know how to deal with any of it.
But she found a lifeline in the form of a text message conversation with an anonymous volunteer from Kids Help Phone.
They were able to figure it out and help me take the advice and listen and get me out of that crisis mode.
Thank you for calling Kids Help Phone. How can I help you?
The Canadian charity has provided counseling services for over 3 decades and launched a new program last year targeting Indigenous youth.
We're looking, of course, at service use and doing everything we can to ensure we're reaching Indigenous young people where they live and that our services are meeting their unique needs.
The manager of the program, called Finding Hope, says they're expanding and promoting their services in Indigenous communities, such as Pine House, Saskatchewan. The remote northern village is home to breathtaking beauty and terrible poverty. Kids Help Phone is partnering with a local photography club, helping youth to see the world through a different lens.
Photography saved my life, and the beauty, seeing the beauty through a lens, and instead of looking at the past and all that, and going through the rough times again.
For many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit kids across Canada, they don't have access to health or mental health services or supports on a regular basis.
Kids Help Phone offers support remotely, 24/7, by phone, online chat, and text message.
If young people's eyes are on a screen right now, then that's where the mental health supports need to be.
At the start of the year, they were receiving more than 1,000 text messages per month from Indigenous youth. And that was before the biggest mental health crisis the organization has ever seen.
Go home and stay home. This is what we all need to be doing.
And I just know how stressful it is for our healthcare system, for my colleagues, and for families.
The COVID-19 pandemic and lockdown saw demand for Kids Help Phone services skyrocket. More than 1,500 cries for help, calls and messages every day, up 350% compared to last year.
They're dealing with isolation. They're stressed, more stressed than they've ever been before. There's a lot of grieving and loss, young people who aren't able to connect with their friends, maybe they're missing graduation. And then we've also seen a real increase in contacts around other things like abuse and neglect. So for some young people, home is not a safe place.
The charity has called emergency services around 10 times a day during the pandemic when needed to respond to a suicide attempt. And that need is greatest in communities that were already struggling.
The anxiety that Indigenous youth feel is heightened in a lot of respects for a number of reasons. I mean, there isn't the same access to health care in a lot of these remote communities. We're telling people over and over again, wash your hands, but we have 100 or so First Nations that are on water advisories right now where that might not be safe. We've got poverty, which is affecting so many Indigenous young people, and we don't have space to socially isolate or physically isolate within the home. These things are causing anxiety for young people.
Faced with that unprecedented need, Kids Help Phone called for backup, asking ordinary Canadians to volunteer to provide emotional support to anonymous strangers over text message. The charity's chief youth officer admits it was a big ask.
We put a call out. We said, hey, people across Canada, raise your hand, join us, take a training. It's a 36-hour training. They do a police background check, and then they sign on to our platform.
And the response was overwhelming.
We had almost 9,000 Canadians raise their hand and say that they wanted to be a part of supporting young people, which to me was huge. We are on track right now to train more people in the next few weeks than we have trained in the last 2 years together.
One of those volunteer crisis responders says it's a win-win.
There's very few volunteer opportunities, I believe, that you can walk at the end of your shift or walk at the end of your day and say, well, I've potentially saved someone's life today.
And thanks to those volunteers, for the first time in its history, Kids Help Phone is now also offering services to adults.
More and more adults were coming to us and they were starting the conversation with, I'm so sorry, I'm not a kid, or can I use this service? And we realized there aren't enough places for adults who are also going through the same distress, the same isolation.
It's a tough time, but good things are coming from it.
Dunham says they've also received a large number of Indigenous volunteers offering to provide support to others in need. One of them is Ashley Cummings, now a member of the charity's Indigenous Advisory Council.
I feel like I'm doing so much better now. It definitely makes me emotional knowing that a lot of other youth are facing very similar or the same kind of circumstances where it just feels like there's too much. I think my message would be to just give yourself one more day. It's all about those little baby steps that build up to large feats of figuring out your mental health.
Anyone who needs mental health support can call Kids Help Phone at 1-800-668-6868 or text 686868. The service is available 24 hours a day, and as we mentioned, it's for kids and adults